Sounds
So
good.
where I'd like to begin then, I think, is I've read your book, Proof of Heaven, a number of years ago. And the thing that struck me the most from the book, if I remember, you're one of the few near-death experiences where you go to the void, the kind of dark black space. Isn't that, I'm remembering that correctly, yeah?
Yes, but the to call it the void is, I call it the core. That was kind of my term for it, but it's a complete bliss, oneness with an infinitely loving God force of healing and wholeness. So to call it a void is a little bit misleading. I often refer to it as a dazzling darkness. It's where all paradoxes are resolved, and in that state of pure oneness, which I believe we can all achieve through meditation and centering prayer, spontaneous epiphany. So you don't have to have an NDE, and from my point of view, to get that sense of pure oneness. But it's quite common in near-death experiences, at least some of the more profound, deeper ones that involve miraculous healing, like Anita Morjani's case, I think, and Dr. Mary C. Neal's.
That was quite, yeah, for Anita, that was quite dramatic, actually, wasn't it, the healing? So what
Yeah.
I'm interested in, even to try and explain to someone reading this article, what is the closest that they can get to the core? I mean, when you hear somebody like Eckhart or Michael Singer, these guys, and they talk about the awareness behind all the thoughts, this place where you look at what your mind is saying. And you, like, when I think of the core, I also think of the absolute. There's nothing to compare anything to. There's nothing to contrast anything to. So what's the closest a human being living this life can get to that feeling that you felt in that place?
Well, I think the important thing that I often, Karen and I do a lot of meditation workshops around the world on all of this. And probably most important thing is for people to acknowledge, as Michael Singer puts it in his book, The Untethered Soul, the voice in your head, your stream of thoughts, is not who you are. That is not your consciousness. It's in many ways, I think, a mistake that Descartes made. When he said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. What he should have clarified that I am aware of this running stream of thoughts, and that means I exist. But the awareness and the consciousness are not the running stream of thoughts. That's the ego mind. And it's very, very important for people, like in meditation and centering prayer and trying to grok this and connect with the universe, to acknowledge, as Michael Singer calls that little voice in your head, he says it's your annoying roommate. That is very much the case. And what I do in meditation, I use sacred acoustics, binaural brainwave entrainment, binaural beat brainwave entrainment, an hour to a day. And I've been doing that for more than the last decade. But the first thing I do is I let that little ego voice in my mind, it can state a request, an intention, ask a question, what have you, but then it goes into time out. And I think especially when people develop a powerful mode of meditation, and that can come in many different forms, but for those who don't already have such a tool, we recommend Sacred Acoustics as a very good place to start. And that's because I learned, within 2 years of my coma, the power of using binaural beat brainwave entrainment. It's a really, we go into a lot of detail about it in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, but it's an extraordinary technique. And we've shown that with our workshops and with Karen's feedback on the Sacred Acoustics website, that people can get into very deep states of conscious awareness. And it begins with acknowledging that the little voice in our heads is not who we truly are. And our consciousness is a much richer kind of connection with the universe than we often assume. And the modern neuroscientific views emerging about all this really view consciousness as primordial, that we're sharing one mind, one tremendous consciousness. There's a beautiful book by a colleague, Dr. Larry Dossey. It's called One Mind, and he goes into great detail of all the proof that we're really sharing one mind. And it's not just humans sharing one mind, but we share it with animals, in many ways with plant life. I mean, all of life and sentience throughout the universe is united through this one mind. So it's a much bigger picture than the illusion that I harbored before my coma, when I was shackled by the constraints of reductive materialist neuroscience and fooled into believing the brain creates consciousness. The modern model is that the brain is a transceiver or filter that allows a primordial consciousness to manifest. But as we escape the shackles of the brain and body, we move back into that oneness. So that I think is one of the most crucial things for people to get is, and then you start studying NDEs and shared death experiences and past life memories in children, indicative of reincarnation. And that's where you really start to open up to the modern science of consciousness, which is the topic of our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. But luckily, many scientists around the world who study consciousness have endorsed that work. And there are other works. I don't know if you're familiar with the BigelowInstitute.org and the recent contest they had for evidence of the afterlife, or evidence of survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death. But if you go to BigelowInstitute.org, you'll uncover 29 winning essays. And just if you read the first one by Jeffrey Mishlove, everyone who is a rational thinking person will start to realize the afterlife is absolutely real. And Mishlove comes at it from many different angles. It's beautifully done. And then the other 28 papers are different ways of presenting a lot of this incredible information. So with that contest and with that information, no rational thinking person should ever doubt the veracity of NDEs and shared death experiences and what they're telling us about the nature of reality, and that our consciousness is not restricted to our body and brain and birth to death in this incarnation.
I think the evidence is overwhelming at this point. I mean, I've heard the phrase bandied around, no one's ever gone and come back. Well, you can't say that anymore. That's just completely blown.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
especially when you look at these essays and realize how this overlaps beautifully with the, say, the work, there's a book by Christopher Kerr, K-E-R-R, it's called Death is But a Dream, came out in the last 2 or 3 years. And he's all in the hospice movement. He's a Buffalo, New York hospice worker. And he's been there for decades, and the stories that he tells about life experiences mesh perfectly with the stories of NDEs and shared death experience. So why would anybody think these are separate phenomena? They support each other tremendously. This is about what we can all expect when we're leaving the physical world.
It's what I want to ask you now, Eben, and I love the binaural beats, by the way, just to comment on that. I'm a big fan of Holosync and Bob Monroe, those kind of pioneering people. So thank you for mentioning that, because I think that's a great tool for people who are beginning to meditate. Right. But where I want to go now is reality. So you went to this other place and you spent quite a bit of time there. And how does reality look to you now in terms of this reality? I've heard you say is a bit like a dream in terms of how vivid it is over there. So what is reality, or are we just multidimensional and we just switch channels as we go along? And the only real ultimate reality is that place you talk about, the core, where everything else just comes from.
I think ultimate reality can only be approached through acknowledging the entire spectrum of human experience around all of these kinds of events. And that includes our normal day-to-day consensus reality in the material world. But it's an acknowledgement that you cannot reduce, a human or a soul to one incarnation here on Earth in a body, but that in fact, our connection with the universe is much grander than that. And it does involve multiple incarnations. I would say important to point out, and again, we stress all this in Living in a Mindful Universe. And in fact, in my second book, The Map of Heaven, we talk extensively about this whole issue of reincarnation, and how it's not a simple, like some people would say a Buddhist interpretation is of this wheel of suffering, multiple incarnations, and that your goal is to get off of it. No, this idea, and what I think emerges from a lot of NDEs and the NDE community at large, independent of their prior belief systems, is really one much more that there's purpose. In fact, I would define spirituality as having two ingredients alone. One is a strong sense and a practical application of unity with other beings and with the universe at large, that one mind. The other is that it all has meaning and purpose, that it's filled in essence with the grace of God. And this is about transformation. It's about the evolution of all of consciousness, coming to a deeper understanding of our own individual relationship with others and with the universe at large, and then coming to realize that we have a shared purpose and meaning to our lives. And in fact, I would say the ultimate purpose of it all, we don't know, we can't tell, because humans, we're just beyond, say, dogs and bears and cats and horses in terms of our ability to bring the consciousness of the universe into understanding here, but we're much closer to them than we are to infinite knowledge. And I believe that from this perspective, in the 21st century and looking at human evolution, and I'll also point out that much of the deep truth of the science of consciousness emerging now about oneness and connectedness is a truth that has been in spiritual traditions, East and West, going back thousands of years. So in other words, we just as I think it was T.S. Eliot who said, you go through this huge journey and then you wind up somewhere and you realize you're right back where you started from. In many ways, that's kind of what the modern science of consciousness, heavily influenced by modern quantum physics. You cannot discuss any of this without a much more robust understanding of the measurement paradox and the role of the mental layer of the universe in emergent reality. And it gets into discussions of free will. The materialist science that I worship before my coma would have insisted there's no such thing as free will. It's a chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, giving you an illusion of consciousness, illusion of free will. I now realize that's not true, because free will is alive and well in these emerging models of consciousness. And the free will is all about an evolution of consciousness itself. Just as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote in his beautiful book, The Phenomenon of Man in the Mid-20th Century, he recognized that discussion about evolution, Darwinian evolution, was a teeny little aspect of what was really going on, that there was a much grander sense of evolution of all consciousness throughout the cosmos. And I believe that's the bigger purpose and meaning of all this, and coming to this richer understanding. And at the current state of human development, just as we were 5,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, when Jesus of Nazareth brought a message of love and of oneness and of the kingdom of God being within mind, in essence, he was saying supporting what I would say is the modern conclusion. I often talk about idealism, the mental layer of the universe, but in fact, Karen and I go much deeper in many of our discussions and public sharings about this. And it's, I think, something that some philosophers like Ed Kelly in his book, Consciousness Unbound, comes to a conclusion of philosophical position of evolutionary panentheism. And that's probably a better way of putting where I think the reality lies. It kind of goes beyond idealism, but this is where you get so much into definitions of God and consciousness and all that you really need to quit splitting things apart with definitions and start looking at a unified reality. And that unified reality, when you say evolutionary panentheism, it's just saying that one mind is something we all share. It's the God mind that so many mystics and prophets and NDEers and others have encountered. Many people through meditation, you don't need the NDE, etc. There are many ways that sentient beings come in touch with this, but the deep reality is that God force is within us all. And the ultimate kind of ambience is of love, compassion, and kindness. And that's what NDEers across the spectrum, going back thousands of years, share as the background of that realm, is this incredible sense of love. And that's what I think we need to focus on in the current era.
Absolutely.
Notion of oneness and connectedness and shared purpose, and that at least from the perspective of humanity in these millennia, we can't say what it's going to be a million years from now. I promise you it will evolve tremendously. But from our perspective right now, it is truly about synthesizing and unifying many of the concepts of spiritual and scientific and philosophical traditions over thousands of years that really converge in the here and now with this discussion of the mind-brain relationship and the nature of reality.
There's mention as well, even of when you were over there, you did encounter other energetic beings. I think particularly your own guardian angel.
Yes.
And did you feel as well that you got a sense of a kind of a God presence when you were there also? Talk to us a little bit about
the way I often describe it in talks and in Proof of Heaven, it's like this, when I was first there in that Gateway Valley, that incredibly rich realm, kind of like Plato's world of ideals, but for the evolving soul, there came a point where there's what I call a soft summer breeze that blew through. It was, in my early writings, I said a divine wind, the breath of God. There are many different words I use for it. But that was my first awareness, given the fact that I was amnesic, that I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life. I was not constrained by any philosophical or religious belief systems. I had a truly empty slate with that amnesia. And even though that's atypical for NDEs to not really remember details of your life, it was extraordinary in what it empowered about my lessons. And in fact, if I had followed the normal script, I would have scripted this to meet my father, my adoptive father, who had passed over 4 years before my coma. But he was nowhere to be found. In the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I do describe encountering his soul 2.5 years later in deep meditation. And that was extraordinary. But the fact is, I had to have that amnesia, and I had to have my spiritual guide be this beautiful woman who I just did not know. Even though it turns out 4 months post-coma, I discovered it was my guardian, that my guardian angel was that beautiful birth sister who died 2 years before I even found out about her existence. All of that were necessary ingredients, because without that, I would have been more tempted, in spite of a 1 in a million diagnosis of E. coli bacterial meningoencephalitis in an adult and a 1 in a billion recovery. I would have been tempted to dismiss it as, oh, you only see who you want to see on the way out. Instead, I needed a deeper mystery to kind of force that on me. So this incredible power of that spiritual being, and of course, she is still very present to me in deep meditation as a spiritual guide, as is the soul of my adoptive father, who I encountered 2.5 years post coma in meditation. So yes, I've developed very rich relationships with them over the ensuing 13 years.
It's an incredible experience, really, isn't it? And I wanted to ask you a bit more about the experience itself, the depth of it, how you felt when you came out of it, how long it lasted, how long it stayed. I mean, it's probably still with you now, but how did it change your life? What was the dramatic change that you noticed?
Well, initially, it took 2 months for all my neuroscience, neurosurgical knowledge and physics, cosmology, et cetera, all that semantic knowledge to return. During that early period, I was just blown away by the ultra reality of this experience. Now, interesting, as I also discussed in Proof of Heaven, was I had this extraordinary spiritual experience that I remember today as if it happened yesterday morning. I mean, these events do not change in your memory. They're astonishingly robust and stable over time. And scientific papers have studied that phenomenon exactly about these experiences. But as I mentioned in the book and in many talks, I also had, after they extubated me, after I came out of coma, my brain was still whacked. I was in the ICU. And I would be in and out of these crazy psychotic nightmares. So I had all that going on too. And those nightmares were more real than your normal dream, but they were nowhere near the crisp, detailed ultra reality and meaningfulness of the deep coma experience. And what I witnessed was, over those first few weeks, the memories of the psychotic nightmare, even though I talked about them just as I talked about the deep coma experience, those memories faded. And within a few weeks, it was very hard for me to even think about them without referring to notes. And but the deep coma experience, the ultra real experience, was sharp and crisp, vibrant, alive. Those memories did not fade at all. So it was a beautiful example of the contrast between an ICU psychosis and the kind of craziness of the brain, the filter in its damaged state, versus that deep connection with pure mind and consciousness at a soul level, which is what all of us experience as we leave this physical world. And I would stress that when you study past life memories in children, And there's a huge literature. UVADOPS.org is an excellent starting resource with more than 2,500 cases studied over 6 decades. But then you start to realize that this continuity of existence and this program forgetting, because we're not meant to just remember all that past life and between life memory. That stuff is supposed to be covered over, which it normally is. That's why NDEs are so amazing, because they allow you to reconnect and kind of remember stuff that was kind of forgotten during what psychologists call the amnesia of childhood, which hits around 6 or 7. And that's when our memory recall shifts to a more linguistically based form, which covers over those memories of early life, before that linguistic center was so well developed. It's extraordinary, but program forgetting is a very key component to understanding why we can have these extraordinary higher soul experiences, and yet living in these bodies, especially slave to our ego mind, we don't necessarily remember every bit of that. And that's why meditation, centering prayer are so crucial in this, because they help you thin the veil and reconnect with that kind of soul line.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll go live in a couple of minutes. Before we do, there's one further thing I want to ask you about light and dark, and how we're kind of programmed in this society to be afraid of the dark and the light's the good. So when you went to this place, were you initially terrified in that place?
Well, it's interesting, given that I was amnesic, this was just the way it was. This was existence. I couldn't remember anything better. So I wasn't terrified. When I described it coming out of it all, it sounded foreboding and kind of like a purgatory or kind of a hellish experience. And I think if I had just had my NDE as the earthworm's eye view and then come back to this world, I would have had been one of the 3 to 5% of NDEs that are described as, quote, hellish. But no, I think that those are, in general, they're incomplete, or maybe they involve a life review of somebody who is so busy handing out pain and suffering to others. And when you have to feel the business end of that in a life review, they didn't like that. But to me, it was not really terrifying, although it did seem kind of suffocating and confusing before I found that musical light portal up into the Gateway Valley. That was so refreshing and liberating from that point on. And I would cycle through these realms multiple times, up to the core, then back to Earthworm's Eye View, up into the Gateway Valley, light portal back into the core again and again. Those things happened many times. But the only time I was really terrified was at the very end of the journey. I described the 6 faces I saw, up until that point. And I'd been told in the core, not in words, but in conceptual flow, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. And I'd come to believe going back was back to the Earthworm's Eye View. But then, of course, at the end of the journey, I was banned from using the musical notes to conjure up that light portal. And to say I was sad at that point would be a vast understatement, but I also knew I could trust in the universe that I would be taken care of. And that's when those other events happened, seeing the power of prayer and the multitudes around me, and then seeing the 6 faces that served as veridical time anchors. All this is in proof of heaven. But it was the last one of those faces. That's when I felt terror. It was a 10-year-old boy. I didn't know who he was. It turns out it was my youngest son, Bond. They'd protected him from the worst news during most of the week. But that Sunday morning, day 7 of coma, that's when the doctors, said I'd gone from 10% to 2% chance of survival, no chance of recovery. And they were recommending stopping the antibiotics, letting nature take its course, letting me go. When Bond overheard that, he knew this was very bad, ran down the hallway into my ICU room, pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking over there, one eye over there, neither pupil working. Anybody in medicine know that's a horrible picture. I promise you, I didn't see him with my eyes. I didn't hear him with my ears, but his pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. As if somehow that would make it so. I didn't understand the words, but it was the nature of his pleading and this deep sense of connection with his soul. Now it all mattered. Now I did have to go back to wherever it was they told me I was going back to. I still didn't understand what that involved, but I knew I had to do it, and I was terrified. If at any point during the journey I was frightened, yes, that was it, when I suddenly had to understand things and had a responsibility to another soul.
Thank you, Eben. So we will go live now. Just allow me to turn on my lights here a bit better before we go live.
Right.
That's grand. So we've got plenty to work on there for the article. Thank you for that. It was brilliant.
Good.
And have you been to Ireland before?
I have not, and I'm aching to go. I've been to England and to Scotland, have not been to Wales, not been to Ireland. My youngest sister went to Ireland about 15 years ago, just went there with 2 weeks to spare, no plans at all. She just hit the airport, I think in Dublin, and she just wanted to let it unfold, and she had the time of her life, just meeting people, going to pubs, all the music, all the joy and merriment. So yes, I would love to go there. I think my partner Karen, who I do tremendous amount of work with Karen, and she during the pandemic has become a little bit of a homebody, at least until COVID really is gone, or at least is suppressed. But I think I could probably even entice her into a trip to Ireland. We would both enjoy the kind of spirit and the love of the people and the music and the everything. So I'm hoping someday we can go there.
Yeah, the sacred sites here, the energy here, the portals, quite amazing. So if you ever decide to come, me and Jane, who's hosting this event with me, would love to do an event with you. So now that things are back to normal, we can have a chat about that another time. So
yes, well, I would absolutely love that opportunity.
Brilliant. So I'm gonna click go live now, and then I'll introduce you to the audience. Okay. Let me see when it goes live. It should go live in a second. Yes, so we're live on Facebook. Hello, folks. You're very welcome, Positive Lifers. I have a brilliant guest here today. I'm going to give you a little preview of our event with Dr. Eben Alexander, who is coming up in March, and I'll post the details to the event below. It's an online event, and you're very welcome to attend. I'm a big fan of near-death experiences. I think they're an incredible insight into what's going on in actual reality. And we have one of the foremost, one of the most famous ones in the world, actually, along with Anita Morjani, I would say, Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander, can you tell people what to expect at this event, and maybe give them, for people who don't know, a brief insight into your actual near-death experience?
Yes, well, the event, I'm very excited about this event. It's an opportunity to share the rich spiritual background of my story, the beautiful events that really changed my life forever. And of course, I'll also be discussing the medical case report that came out that confirmed and validated and actually strengthened a lot of the claims I made in Proof of Heaven. That was written by 3 doctors not involved in my care. And of course, we will then extend into what I view as some of the most exciting aspects of this. And that has to do with the modern science of consciousness, and how scientists who study consciousness are rapidly arriving at a point based on the evidence and rational inquiry that the afterlife is absolutely real, that our souls have a very deep and real existence. This all has to do with free will, which the materialist science that I worship before my coma would deny. And also has a tremendous amount to do with healing, coming into wholeness. That's one of the greatest gifts that comes from studying NDEs, near-death, shared death experiences, things like that. And the modern science of consciousness is a realization that each and every one of us has a tremendous power to come into deep and profound physical, mental, and emotional healing by acknowledging that we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe, and that we have free will as sentient beings to manifest the dreams of our reality. And that begins with our very health. That's kind of the gold mine gift that this kind of knowledge, this kind of scientific study brings. And it all begins with an extraordinary story, my NDE, that of course I wrote up in the book Proof of Heaven, that clearly resonated with people around the world, given that that book's been almost 2 years at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, 42 weeks in the #1 position, and has been published in over 40 languages. And my NDE is like so many thousands of NDEs available. In fact, there are 300,000 available on the internet and in books and scientific studies, and they all really converge to one beautiful message of unity, that we're in this together and we need to take care of each other, and the binding force of love. And this is all a message that I think this world is ready to hear. When you see all the polarization, all the kind of friction and threats of war, things like that, it's all completely against the deep lessons coming out of NDEs and the science of consciousness that really, I think the whole world will follow, because that's where the empirical data lead, That's where our understanding leads. So it's a tremendous gift to the world to bring all of this into focus and base it in personal experience with recommendations about meditation and techniques for going deep within to recover your own connection with the universe at large and your own ability to contribute to the transformation and metamorphosis of all of humankind.
And when you mention humankind, we're just going to stay on here a little bit longer, but when you mention humankind, what I find fascinating with NDEs is you, and I think this relates to you as well, you have the NDE and the character of Eben is like it's not relevant when you're over there. It's almost like a dream you had. It's not that important. So from your perspective, having the NDE, how do you view how important humanity is? I mean, is it just a character we're playing and something we drop when we go to the other dimension? Or is it more significant?
No, I think it's much more significant. I've come to realize that in many ways, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, in his book, The Phenomenon of Man in the mid-20th century, hit the nail on the head. He was a scientist, paleontologist, but also spiritual, a French Jesuit priest. And in his book, he clarifies that evolution was much more than the simple little puny biological evolution on Earth, but that in fact, all of consciousness was transforming and evolving. And that is what is truly going on. Important thing to point out is that growth of our souls in participating with this transformation of all of sentience throughout the universe, that growth occurs here in these physical lifetimes. Even though we're dumbed down, there's program forgetting, so we don't necessarily remember past lives and between lives. That's all covered over to give us buy-in, to give us skin in the game. So it's really here that we get the growth done in the material world. But it's almost like breathing in and out. You have to breathe out to breathe in, and vice versa. Likewise, we have these physical body incarnations, but then you have your life reviews, you know, your time between lives, that return to that deep loving base of our spiritual existence, and then re-entering this world, then having the program forgetting. I mean, there's a soul line. There's certain things that are set up in your life journey. But then we engage it, and it's our free will choices of how we deal with the hardships and difficulties in life. That's what allows us to transform and grow. And in many ways, humanity is facing the same thing. In addiction and alcoholism work, you call it the gift of desperation, because all addiction and alcoholism is really kind of a struggle with an ego mind that is not who you truly are. And in many ways, I would say that a lot of the polarization and apparent conflict in our world today presents us with this collective gift of desperation. And climate change is part of it, every bit of it. But there's reason for hope and optimism in the modern science of consciousness, and NDEs are the tip of the spear in showing us the power of love and that we're all deeply interconnected. And that's how we can truly transform and grow as a sentient contributor to the cosmic mind. That's what we're all participating in now. It's a beautiful gift for us individually and societally, and for all of humanity and the planet Earth and beyond. So it's a glorious journey that I'm very optimistic about.
Thank you for that, because in spiritual circles, we do hear from time to time, you know, I'm mainly a spiritual being, you know, how important is the human experience? But the human is feeding back to the cosmic mind, this beautiful color, this growth. So it's all synergistically together. And the way you weaved it around there was beautiful. And it reminded me of when I spoke to Anita Marjani. She described it as a tapestry of light, all interconnected. So it's a beautiful vision to end on. And I want to say, even, we're so looking forward to having you for the event. I think it's March 23rd, but obviously I'll put the details below in the comments so people can just link into that. Thank you for joining me here today.
It's at 2 p.m. Eastern time, so I guess that's 7 p.m. your time. And I'm very much looking forward to it, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on, and we'll have a great time on March 23rd.
Thank you so much. See you, everybody. We'll see you at the event. And as I said, it's down there if you want to log on and find out more about it. Thanks again. See you soon, folks. Bye-bye. Okay, Eben, so we're stopped the live call there, and now we're back just recording. What I'll do at the end of the article is I'm going to plug plug your website and the books. The latest book, just remind me of the title of the latest book again.
It's called Living in a Mindful Universe. Living in a Mindful Universe. It's co-written with my partner and life partner and the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, Karen Newell.
Okay, sacred acoustics. That's the actual meditation kind of music you were talking about, the binaural.
Right. If you go to sacredacoustics.com, you can learn a lot more. She has a free 20-minute download. The important thing is to listen through headphones, as I'm sure you realize. That's how you get maximum power from the differential frequency brainwave entrainment.
Brilliant. So thank you so much for joining me today. And we'll send you a draft of the article before we go to press as well.
Excellent. If you would, just make sure you put ebenalexander.com. That's the main resource where people can find out much more about me. ebenalexander.com. And if you want, there's also a brilliant free lecture series or interview series that Karen and I did during the pandemic that people can get at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. So that's the website where people we did interviews with a lot of people, professionals, scientists, consciousness studiers, experiencers, etc., for about 1.5 years during the early pandemic. So it's all available for free. Those interviews are a gold mine for people.
And back in the day, you were actually on Oprah Winfrey. Is that correct?
Yes, several. I was on her once. I was on Dr. Oz, I think 3 times, and then ABC News, multiple things, 2020, ABC Morning News, etc. So, yeah, it was covered a lot. In fact, ebenalexander.com has a listing of a lot of the media appearances if you want to see much more of that.
So obviously your NDE was definitely preordained to wake a lot of people up to ultimate reality.
Well, I think it just contributes to the beautiful literature of all these. I love all NDEs. I mean, to me, they're just fascinating. Mine was important to the scientific community. And I guess also the fact that Proof of Heaven seemed to resonate with a large audience around the world is important. And basically that's, I'd say, because of resonance. It's because people remembered in their own experience things that kind of lit up when they read about my experience. So in that sense, it's of great value. But the big reality is all NDEs are tremendous. They help us understand much more fully this relationship we have with the universe and how to manifest our free will most absolutely.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to pick up that book, Death is But a Dream. That's stuck in my mind there.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me the author's name again, actually, of that one?
Christopher Kerr, Kerr.
That sounds fascinating. Okay.
It's a great one, and it dovetails beautifully with all this work. And also BigelowInstitute.org. Do not miss those papers.
Okay. I'm going to get your new one, and I'll read that before we do the interview in March. So I'll be well up to speed. Thank you, Eben.
All right. Thank you. All right. We'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.